Welcome to Flow with Recess, a podcast to help you unlock your best self. Join Chief Psychology Officer of Recess, Matt Swartz, and our CEO, Kelz Bethel, your hosts on this journey to flow.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Flow with Recess. I'm Matt Swartz.
And I'm Kelz.
And we're happy to have you guys joining us today. Today on the podcast, we're talking about mindfulness, a topic that has been very much in vogue in the success community in the last, 10 years. Bunch of apps. We got our Calm, we got our Headspace, we've got mindfulness meditation. So let's take a step back. Let's talk about what is this mindfulness thing? Why do we want to do it? What are the benefits? We're going to talk a little bit about our personal experiences with mindfulness. We're going to talk about where mindfulness and flow meet, and some tips for using mindfulness to find flow.
Here's your 30-second bilateral moment. If you aren't already using headphones, now's the time to grab them and keep the flow going. Take this time to reconnect with your body and mind. Just listen to the sound move back and forth between your headphones and pay attention to the sensations in your body. Liked that? For more bilateral moments and full-length tracks, check out our bilateral playlist on YouTube. Links provided in the show notes.
Yeah, so, I guess the first thing that we should always start off with is a definition, Matt. Like, what exactly is mindfulness? I think people often think mindfulness is meditation, or they really don't even understand the difference between mindfulness, meditation, and what we're really talking about here. So what is mindfulness exactly?
So the definition of mindfulness is being fully present and engaged in the present moment. So not in the past, not in the future, here and now. There is a difference between mindfulness as a framework for consciousness. How does consciousness work? Why does it work this way? How do we understand it? And mindfulness skills as ways of practicing and growing our mindfulness. And both of these things are important, but I think the majority of the time when we're talking about mindfulness, we just end up talking about the skills.
Yeah.
So the framework starts like this. Most of us are asleep. Most of us are sleepwalking our way through life. We are a collection of automatic habits, automatic patterns of thinking, automatic emotional responses. And as you've heard me say a million times, a lot of us are just repeating the patterns that were constructed in our early life, right? What if we could wake up, right? What if we could begin to more easily engage in the present moment? And here's the hard part. Every person I'm talking to, you're going to go to, well, Matt, I'm not asleep. I'm present. I'm living my life. And it's so hard for me to explain to you because I would have said the same thing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But the thing is that awareness and mindfulness can always grow. And as awake as you think you are right now, you can still wake up. You can still dismantle automatic habits, beliefs, those kinds of things.
Yeah. I think, as you're saying that, I think it really has to do with, as you mentioned that, I think with mindfulness, it is sort of a practice. I'm getting that too. It's not something that you arrive at that state and I am like a mindful person, but it's something that sort of builds as a practice. It's a way of living. I'm guessing that is what it is, right?
Absolutely. Mindfulness can be a concept, it can be a framework, it can be a lifestyle, or it can just be a hobby, right?
Yeah.
You can have a hobby of mindfulness. That's fine. And there's no judgment there, but that's different than a lifestyle of mindfulness, right? So there's this question of like, do you want to live mindfully, really mindfully, right? Because again, most of us are in the future. That's, planning for the future. That's what we've been taught, right? Do you want to really live mindfully? And the good news is, I think on the other side, you'll find it's a lot better. But the bad news is the journey to get there often is harder before it gets easier.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things we've stacked on top of each other that prevent us from being truly mindful.
So I guess only because I think some people still confuse this idea of mindfulness and meditation, and not really because of the packaging and the marketing around mindfulness in the last 10 years. I think that a lot of people really don't know the difference between mindfulness, meditation, mindful meditation. And I think that that's a big, blurry, gray area for a lot of people.
Cool. Let me hopefully assuage that in 1 minute. So mindfulness as a framework says there are 3 components of our conscious experience. And we are either existing within one or multiple of those components at once. The 3 components are perception, interpretation, and response. Perception is the act of taking in information through our senses from the outside and the inside world, right? If I feel my stomach hurting, or if I see a bird flying, right? That's perception. The interpretation is, as soon as that information hits my brain, it begins to be filtered through a bunch of past experiences. I don't just see a bird, I see a robin. I don't just feel my stomach, I'm nervous, right? So immediately I see a dog. I either like dogs or I hate dogs, right? Either a dog bit me or it reminds me of my dog at home, right? And so I am immediately adding information on top of the information I'm giving, and that's interpretation. One of the key lessons of mindfulness practice is widening the gap between perception and interpretation, increasing the amount of time before my brain automatically assigns a judgment, a label, an interpretation to the info I'm getting, so that the more you practice mindfulness, you can just experience things without adding labels. Yeah. I'm watching this already for my 3-year-old, right? We're teaching him, what's that thing? What color is it? What shape is it? What letter does it start with? Like, we're teaching him how to assign all of these mental labels. And to some degree, you have to in order to navigate the world. But then as you grow up, you may find it's helpful to dismantle that. So perception, interpretation, and then response. And response is doing stuff. It can be an action, but it can also be a response thought or a response emotion, right? And again, often automatic, often habitual, right? And so what we're trying to do is we're also trying to help people in mindfulness practice gain the ability to respond through and into the present moment rather than respond through the past, rather than respond to the automatic interpretation that they've been given by their brain, because sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
So, Kelz, does that make sense in terms of the framework of mindfulness, the perception, the interpretation, and the action?
Yeah, definitely. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it's interesting because I think some of us, depending on the things that we're facing, it's like some of us may be having challenges around a particular space. Some of us automatically respond, and that may be a challenge, and we need to be more mindful to not be so quick to respond, and to sit with that, be mindful of what is going on before we just automatically respond based on past behavior, based on trauma, based on whatever the automatic response is. And then some people, it may be that we have a bunch of things assigned to our interpretation that may not actually be helping us, serving us, or, carrying us on a growth journey. So some people need to be more mindful in terms of how they actually interpret their environment.
And the third part is people who are having challenges with perception. Are you paying attention to the right information? Are you trying to take in too much information or too little? So our culture right now has a perception issue because we're taking in all of this info from our cell phones and we're not having any time to process it, right? So perception in itself can be an issue. So again, there are all of these mindfulness skills, but an example of a mindfulness skill that would be helpful with perception is telling somebody to just eat their dinner without watching TV or listening to a podcast, or literally just taste your food for 15 minutes, right? And watch your mind trail off and gently bring it back, right? So there are these different skills that you can target each area of mindfulness or multiple areas of mindfulness at once.
I love that, because I think automatically I thought of the second two. And I feel like for me personally, it's like that relationship with perception, and just, and that I think that is like also super important to help us to sort of dial things in and become, we talk about presence, but being in that present moment, to be able to focus, to be able to do what we need to do. I think it's really important that you mentioned that, because I think that is also what that sort of presence is about too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you get that first part dialed in better, which again could take years,
Yeah.
The second and the third improve as you go as well. So intervening as early in the process as possible, working on the foundation rather than just stacking stuff on top.
Yeah. So I mean, we sort of started to talk about it in terms of, we could see, I think people could automatically start to see why this is important. But if we go more into it, like being mindful and practicing mindfulness, what are some of the benefits that we could see when we start to engage in mindfulness? In our daily lives, like what are some of the benefits of just practice in general?
Yeah. So whether you get into the spiritual or the secular, modes of mindfulness thought, it all starts with a connection to one's seat of awareness, right? To one's consciousness. And then depending where you go from there, you might see things like increased connection with what we might call oneself. And so again, the religious mindfulness traditions would say, well, careful, Matt, but I'm going to approach this from what I think is kind of a middle ground approach that is somewhere in between, spiritual and secular, right? So increased connection with oneself. What does that mean? One's body, one's emotions, one's mind, right? I believe that on the face of it, beginner meditation should not start with any sort of objective, like clear your mind, because you're going to be screwed. Honestly, it's like fighting a mountain with a toothpick. It's just horrible. What's much better is observe your mind, observe your body, observe your emotions, right? Observe your breath. Don't do anything with it. Just observe, because it's like meeting a new friend for the first time and telling them to do something, rather than like, I'm meeting you, I need to observe you, I need to get to know you, I need to ask you questions, right? Like if you're disconnected from your mind, from your body, from your emotions, you can't just, okay, I just met you, clear yourself. It's like, yeah, good luck. You need to form that relationship first. And I think most of us are disconnected from that, right? Other things would be perhaps increased connection to others.
Yeah.
Or increased connection to the world around us, not in a codependent way, but in a way of awareness and acknowledgement, the awareness of our environment, the awareness of the internal, invisible experiences of the other. Oh, they're conscious and aware just like me.
Yeah.
Right? Which, unfortunately, most humans don't get that, don't really get what that means, right? So increased connection with oneself, with the others, with the world around us. I would hope to see less reactivity, less emotional reactivity, less habitual response, right? More intention, more choice, more autonomy. Would also hope to see overall decreased stress and anxiety. I certainly know, I've gone from 10 televisions playing in my head at the same time to 3. And oh my God, that's way better. I mean, I'd love to get it down to 1. That, will give me another 10 years, right? But decreased stress and anxiety for sure. And then also, there's a lot of research out there in regards to how mindfulness physiologically affects the brain.
Yeah.
And there are, I could probably do a whole hour on this, right? Things like, it decreases the amygdala response, the fight or flight limbic system emotional response. It decreases the potency of high level emotion. It can increase creativity, increase feelings of wellness. There's, tons and tons and tons. And I'm not here to be the mouthpiece for mindfulness, because I see it as a tool in a larger toolbox. But there's a lot of really good data on how mindfulness affects the brain that it's worth looking into and understanding if you care.
Yeah. And I think for me, I think the popularity of mindfulness within the last 10 years or so, besides the the commercialization of it in a way, it also is it's a pretty simple practice to adopt into your daily life. It's something that is very beneficial, and it's something that you could easily start with small things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to give some tips here, right? But that would be, don't get bogged down by like, oh my God, I need to be like a monk. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you want to devote your life in 30 years, right? The question is, how would mindfulness be practically helpful in my life right now?
Yeah.
What is my priority? Is my priority better goal attainment? Okay, let's talk about how to use mindfulness that way. Is my priority decrease stress? Let's talk about that. Is my priority decreased emotionality? Right. And then based on that, we want to, the problem is it's not a one size fits all thing. Yeah. And so when you go to a meditation app and they say, do this for everybody, maybe not. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, so true. I think, we could talk about our experience with mindfulness now, because for me personally, I started a mindfulness practice probably in about 2014. I think for me, I started to make mindfulness, looking for like a morning routine. I started to make mindfulness something that I built into my morning routine. Get up, I do like, a 15 minutes mindfulness meditation practice. And what I found is that it really did help me just to manage my anxiety and that level of like stress and anxiety in the morning. Sometimes I got up in the morning completely like, monkey brain, just a lot of things going on. And I found that just starting my morning with a mindfulness practice really helped me to just be more conscious and aware of my responses, my body, and
so how did that start for you? Like, because I think this is important for beginners, mm-hmm. right? What was your initial practice?
My initial practice was noticing my breath. So that's just noticing my breath. I started off, noticing my breath, like just being aware, which was something at that time that was completely novel. That was something that I just didn't think about.
2014, man, this is the whole world just changed in 10 years.
Exactly.
So, 2014, you were still, I don't want to call you an early adopter, but at least like second stage adopter,
yeah.
Right? So paying attention to your breath, were you sitting? Were you standing? Like, give me a little more detail to help the listener to imagine what your practice looked like.
Yeah, so I would get up in the morning, Matt, and I would go on the floor. I would just sit, and I would just notice my breath. And that was that. I would just take some time before I got started on my day to just notice the rise in my chest. And yeah, exactly. And just notice it. And I think initially, you see, when you said that thing about trying to control it, I think initially, because I didn't have the knowledge, I started trying this thing where I was trying to clear my head or something, right? And that did not work at all. So so that didn't work, and I kept like going off, and I kept like, no, come back, where are you going, And then I just started to notice my breath, and that moved from just noticing my breath alone to I started to be more mindful throughout my day. So it moved from a morning routine practice to noticing my emotions, noticing, oh, why are you responding like this? Oh, I feel this anxiety in my body. I feel physical. I think the noticing of my breath allowed me to sort of grow into noticing my physiology, my physical experience, and just noticing things that were happening in my body. If I met someone, why am I feeling like this? What emotion is this? And I started to sort of build my mindfulness practice around my emotions and noticing my emotions a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. I think, a lot of people start mindfulness to try to quiet their, minds. And I think that it a lot more helpful in the beginning to just notice. How long in the beginning did you find was palatable for you?
Probably about 5 minutes, but 5 minutes felt very long. I tried for 5 minutes, but even that felt like a long time.
It's incredible. how long 5 minutes can feel when you start. I absolutely recommend starting a practice with 5-10 minutes, whatever. And then a neat trick you can do is you can do the 5 minutes and then do that for a week. And if you feel like you're ready, the next week go to 6 minutes. And just keep slowly upgrading.
Yeah.
Right? What does that mean? Well, that means in, a year, right? If you really 52 weeks in a year, you could be up to an hour.
Yeah.
Right. So if you really like a minute more, and of course there's always days you can't get to it, and I would say, like, be compassionate with yourself, right? If you can't make it a day, instead of beating yourself up, you're just adding extra garbage.
Yeah.
So don't worry, right? Like, you're going to get it as often as you can get it at the relative time you have set for yourself. And if you end early, that's okay, right? But try 5 minutes for a week, see how it goes. Add an extra minute next week, see how it goes. And if you get to a place where it's too much, then stop adding minutes for another week. Try again.
Yeah.
Right? The same amount of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's exactly what I did. I kept just building on the practice until it became longer within that time, but also just building it into, my everyday experience. Because I think also what doing therapy, I was doing CBT at that time, and doing therapy, I started to use mindfulness in my cognitive behavioral therapy as well. And I started to be conscious of my thoughts, be aware of that part where you're talking about your response. I started to be aware of my response. And so I built in the mindfulness into some of the CBT work that I was doing in therapy as well. And I think that's also, like, super important. Because mindfulness is something that is sort of built into different aspects of the things that we're doing.
Yeah, I would say that mindfulness is a lens or a framework through which to approach conscious change.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. So we've got some of the things you're doing on your own. We've got some of the things that you're doing in therapy, trying to bring those together. What came next?
I think the next thing was using mindfulness in terms of the team, in terms of work, right? I noticed that, I, in general, in terms of some of, just managing a team and making decisions, sometimes made decisions based on emotions, automatic emotional decision making, and I started to be more mindful and just, take a step back before I made the decisions. And so I started to build in sort of that check-in, that check-in and that mindful space before I would even go forward with a decision. And so it started to grow into different areas of my life. And it's something that even in terms of, having a team, I would also, say that as well. Like, let's, just take a step. Like, let's not move right this second. Let's wait a second, be aware, see how we're feeling here, and then let's move forward. Yeah.
It's incredibly powerful. What I can tell you is that the decisions that you make within those really emotional places will create continued trouble. Oftentimes that emotion reflected back at you in different ways.
Yeah, makes sense. And what about you, Matt? Like, what is your experience been, or your journey been with mindfulness?
Want to get even deeper into your flow? Learn more about today's episode on our blog, The Science of Productivity. Find out more about today's topic by visiting our blog, Mindfulness and Productivity, Unlocking Your Full Potential. Here you'll get some more insights and tips on how you can maintain your state of flow every day.
So, we're young, Kelz, so by no means am I some early practitioner with mindfulness, but I was lucky enough to begin encountering Eastern philosophy and mindfulness in middle school. The long story short, I think I mentioned on this podcast before, is my parents were getting divorced. I was looking at the way they were living their lives, and I was going, it's not going to work for me. And I started getting into self-help authors, and two specifically, that really began that sort of pathway towards Eastern philosophy and psychology. And the authors were Wayne Dyer, and then I'm betting a number of people are familiar with Alan Watts, who is basically this guy who took Eastern philosophy and made it palatable for the Western lens in, the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And then I got more serious. I got into Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh, and I can look back at my shelf here, and Robert Thurman, Uma Thurman's dad, and like all of these, but a bunch of different people, both from the East and from the West, that were, talking about this stuff. Because for me, my Christian upbringing wasn't bringing me the answers I was looking for. It didn't. Somebody said to me once, Christianity is a collectivist religion for an individualist culture, and Buddhism is an individualist religion for a collectivist culture. And what that means is both of these religions bring different kinds of insights, right? That, Jesus attempts to bring a person out of their own BS and into the bigger collective, interconnected system, right? And meanwhile, the Buddha is first attempting to help people who have been engaged in this collectivist culture where they don't even know who they are, to identify the self, to understand what the self means, and then ultimately to disabuse themselves of the notion of the self. But again, I see both of these traditions, Western traditions and Eastern traditions, as left and right hand. And I think we really should study and understand. And again, if you're not the kind of person who's going to read the, read the Bhagavad Gita or something, like, that's fine. You don't have to be, you don't need to read Heidegger. You don't need to read Nietzsche, right? Go to contemporaries who are interpreting it in a way that is palatable to you, right? And then if you want to go down the rabbit hole, being aware, of course, that everybody, including me, including you, are filtering through the lens of interpretation, whatever we're acquiring from those sources. So, Wayne Dyer can write, his version of the Tao Te Ching, but fundamentally, if you read 8 different translations of the Tao Te Ching, you'll get 8 different versions. So just being aware of that, right? So anyway, it's been a lifelong thing for me. I started going to meditations and retreats and getting meditation training in college. Went to some pretty cool, I was in New York for a while, so went to some pretty cool meditation retreats at the Union Theological Seminary in New York. That was a blast. And then in grad school, I was doing a kind of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy that integrates a lot of mindfulness practice and mindfulness framework into the work. So I was being trained in this methodology. I was using it in prison. I was doing prison therapy with prisoners in jails and prisons. And so learning, taking basically this stuff that, and I didn't mean to get into DBT. It just showed up for me. And it was like, oh my God, this is stuff I've been studying applied to Western psychology. It was like, oh, cool. And so began doing that. And then I would say, so I'm teaching my patients mindfulness. I've been doing that forever. And then I think the next kind of mile marker would be when COVID hit. I'd been practicing meditation and yoga and different mindfulness practices for a very long time. But then when COVID hit, I was like, okay, this is time, like, we're going to get really serious. And for me, what really serious meant was I'm going to meditate 45 minutes every single day in the morning. That's going to be my practice. And I want to talk about this because I think this is a good way of understanding how mindfulness evolves for beginners, right? So I've been aware of mindfulness for 20 years. I've been practicing for 10 plus years. And still I had to kind of really approach this as a beginner. So it started with, I want to meditate 45 minutes. I started trying to sit down on my couch, and my brain and my body were like, we are not, this is not, we cannot, I'd been, doing like 15, 20 minutes a day whenever I could, kind of thing. So it was a big jump. And so what luckily I have all of this training and some wisdom, right? And my body said, go to the woods. There was this woods nearby my house. So I went to the woods, and initially my practice began. I'm going to walk in the woods for 45 minutes with an audiobook on. And that took place for a couple of months. And then one day, my brain, my body said, why don't you try some music? And so I switched from the audiobooks to music. And then I did that for about 2 to 3 months. And then one day, my brain and my body, and it wasn't like, I want to be clear, it wasn't like some angel descended on me. It was just like my body became sort of, I would say uncomfortable, but uncomfortable is the wrong word. It just like this feeling you get when something's ready to change. You should do something different.
Yeah.
Didn't have to force anything. I didn't have to decide anything. My body just kind of said, hey, you could change this. So then I dropped the music and was just wandering in the woods silently for about 45 minutes. And then it was actually perfect timing. It started to turn from fall to winter, and my brain and my body said, you could do this. And so then during the winter, 2020, November 2020, I was in my house meditating for 45 minutes every single day. And that practice has stayed with me ever since. There are certainly days I miss because life is chaotic and I have 2 young kids. But if you told me you need to sit down for an hour and meditate right now, I'd be like, oh, cool, great. And it would be a very positive experience. But it took a lot of freaking practice. And it took a lot of allowing that evolution to occur. So I just tell that story to encourage beginners, like actually meditating to a podcast. That's where you may need to start.
Yeah.
Or some meditation music or a meditation app or a guided meditation on YouTube. It's okay to start wherever you're starting. Don't expect yourself just to be able to sit down for 30 minutes and watch your mind. It's something you have to build up to.
Yeah, I love that. Like, I really, really, really love that, Matt, because I think that people need to also hear the journey in terms of something that is accessible to where they're at. And for you, it was that podcast, just taking that time, getting a walk. And I think that's super important too.
There are fundamentally 2 types of like meditative mindfulness practice. There is opening the mind, which is putting yourself in a position to go somewhere and take in whatever stimuli comes to you in the backyard, at the beach, in the forest, like just hear and feel and experience, or even in your house, right? Even in your basement, whatever. And then there's focusing the mind, which is trying to collapse your focus onto one thing, like pay attention to your breath, or notice your thoughts, or imagine a candle flame, or say a mantra, right? So there are all of these different kinds of meditative practices, but fundamentally they're either expanding your awareness or helping you focus your awareness.
I think for me, I'm happy about this conversation because for me, I automatically think about collapsing my awareness, but I think that I feel like I'm going to start to look at it, also expanding my awareness as well, because it's something that I have not even thought about properly in terms of, that practice as well.
If you can go to the beach for an hour, no book, no music, no phone, right? And just take in everything that's happening. And it doesn't mean you need to just sit there. Like, go in the ocean, feel it, right? Be in the sand, dig through it, right? But just be there, be present. Don't worry about later. Don't think about the time you went to the beach last year.
Yeah.
If you do, it's okay. I mean, don't force it, right? But gently bringing ourselves back and just having that present moment. I know this sounds silly, but this is stuff that the human beings were doing until like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've lost it.
Yeah.
And it's so important. It's so important to just be able to be grounded and present when you want to. And there are times where you need to plan. There are times where you need to remember, right? We're not saying those things are bad. We're just saying knowing how to do the present thing when you want to do the present thing.
Definitely. I love that.
And so then the last classic example in terms of experience with mindfulness is being, in a team setting, right? Being able to pay attention to others when they're speaking, right? Classic, right? Why? Because somebody says something and immediately my brain's going and it's saying how I want to respond, or it's going off on a tangent, or it's, I'm not really listening. Most of us are not really listening. We're hearing to respond. We're not listening. We're not engaging, right? And so the more that mindfulness practice has grown, the more I've been able to actually listen to people in meetings rather than wait to tell them what I think next.
Yeah. Important. And I think now, like Matt, I think as we're talking about flow state, what is the correlation or what is the connection between this mindfulness idea and like flow? Like, is it the same? Is it connected? Is it part of it? Is it overarching? Like, what is the relationship between mindfulness and flow?
The Venn diagram is very intertwined. Probably 85 to 90% overlap in the middle. There is flow. And see, you can be in flow and not be mindful, but it's very rare. And you can be mindful and not be in flow, but gosh, I don't know. Are you really not in flow? And so I think there's areas, but I'm saying that just to be open-minded, because I think, really, really 9 times out of 10, you're in the same place. We're talking about the same place. And mindfulness is a tunnel into that place. And so I think a lot of mindfulness practitioners are shooting for the flow. They just may use different language. I want to be present. Well, guess what? Present is the flow, right? And so in our model, in the Foundations of Flow model, presence is an aspect, one of the 5 main aspects of flow, one of the 4 main aspects Recess is working on. And then we get even nitty grittier, and we talk about the 3 aspects of presence, which is awareness, focus, being able to direct that awareness, and energy. And when I say energy, what I mean is, where am I putting energy and where am I getting energy, right? So again, back to the sort of like the phone issue, the 10 TVs issue, right? If I'm putting all of this energy into processing all of the stimuli, and then an hour later I don't have the energy to discuss something important with a person, there's a reason. I'm spending my energy in particular ways, or I'm not engaging in things like mindfulness meditation that will bring me energy, that will refuel my battery, right? So I want to learn how to be aware in the present moment. I want to learn how to harness my focus. Again, sometimes wide, sometimes narrow, sometimes when we talk about concentration, I can have narrow focus. See, this is this whole thing, and I think we may be having a larger conversation about, yes, next podcast is where we get into this. But there's attention, focus, and concentration, and these things are all separate, but we use them interchangeably. And you're talking to somebody with ADHD and who's studied this a lot, so these things are all a little different. But those are some of the main aspects. I think some of the key markers that are shared between flow and mindfulness: diminished self-talk, increased sense of peace, and the positive emotions that come with that, right? Yes, there is a difference. Mindfulness is being fully engaged in the present moment. Flow is the cognitive state where we're feeling our best and performing our best. But most of the time, if I'm mindful, I'm in flow. And if I'm in flow, I'm being mindful.
Yeah.
And our goal, right, one of the 4 goals of Recess is, let us help you enhance your mindfulness, both by encouraging you to pursue traditional practices that we don't, we don't have meditation tapes in Recess, right? But we want to encourage you to go out there and do some of that. But then utilizing the bilateral stimulation to help your brain rewire itself to make it easier to enter a mindful state over time with practice.
Yeah. So, but you could correct me if I'm wrong, but what it sounds like as well is that there is this overlap, but I feel like a big part of flow is also this idea of performance that may not be there within the mindful practice. Is it that flow state also requires the sort of, there is achievement oriented, goal oriented, there is this goal that we're striving towards this flow state? Is that like a big difference?
I think before you get into flow, you can be thinking about it like that. But once you're in flow, you're doing the thing and you're getting immediate feedback. So again, this is like key property of flow state, right? Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, we're talking about getting immediate as possible feedback, and then responding in a way that responds to that feedback, and then getting feedback. And so the gap between doing and perception is so small that we're able to be present and mindful and engaged through the whole experience. Mm-hmm. And if you end up thinking too much into the future, you're not in flow.
True.
But you can plan to be in flow, or you can plan to think about how to use flow in the same way that you can plan how to use mindfulness. I'm going to go to this party and I'm going to be mindful, right? What is that? I'm going to really listen to people. I'm going to really be present. I'm going to notice my own emotional reactions. I'm not going to worry about what's happening at the next party, or, what my wife said to me earlier today, right? So, mindfulness is a tool and a practice and an experience. flow is a very similar tool and a practice and experience. I think it fundamentally comes down to how are we using this?
Yeah.
Right? Flow is being used, flow is, there is a forward momentum and forward motion to it. It's like, let me take mindfulness on the road. And mindfulness is like, I don't need to move anywhere. But, mindfulness is okay, but mindfulness can go on the road. Mindfulness doesn't need to be still to be mindful. It just needs to be present, right? So mindfulness can go on the road with flow, and flow can be still and present with mindfulness, because again, in a mindful state, you are getting the immediate feedback from your brain, from your body, right? And so you can be in a flow state meditating, but you can also meditate and not be in a flow state. And we've been in both places.
Yeah.
Or at least as an experienced meditator, I have had full meditation sessions where I've never hit flow. I've had meditation sessions where it took me a couple of minutes. I was in flow the whole time. Probably traditionally, I take about 15 to 20 minutes to get in flow, and then I'm in flow the rest of my meditation session.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And I guess the next question is, can we then use, because I mean, we're talking about persons who may now be beginning and they're looking to, what sort of practices could they start? Can people use recess to also be mindful and be mindful? Is recess something that could be used for that?
Absolutely. So here's who actually I want to talk to. Maybe we're talking to the beginners, but I really want to talk to the people who say, well, I've already tried meditation and it doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. And you went about it the wrong way because of how you were instructed, and there's different ways to do it, right? Here's how it's going to work. All I'm asking for you is 10 to 15 minutes a day. Right. And what we're going to do is we're going to plug you into recess. You can do this without recess, but let's assume you're doing this with recess. We're going to plug you into recess. You're going to look at the screen. You're going to follow the lights from left to right. And that's it. And that's the focusing the mind. Focus the mind on the ball moving back and forth. And even if you did just that, even if there were no potential benefits to it other than that, you would be growing your mindfulness.
True.
Because you're learning how to sit still and follow the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Even better than that, as you do that, you are helping your brain to heal and increase the ability to be more mindful.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you focus on focusing, which I know sounds insane, but what inside the Recess app, we're going to have you picture yourself focused, picture yourself mindful. You're using Imagine Practice to help the brain areas that are responsible for that to increase your ability to be mindful, right? What I would assume is that somebody, and I will prove it to you, that somebody using Recess in this way will end up increasing their ability to engage in a mindfulness practice more easily outside of the Recess setting.
Yeah, so I love that. So Recess 1, the practice using Recess is a form of mindfulness practice 1. And then 2, Recess helps you build your capacity to get into mindfulness. You would easier in the future be able to find and get into mindfulness. It will help your mindfulness practice, even if the more you use it. Yeah.
The more I have used bilateral stimulation in therapy and for funsies, the easier meditation has gotten for me, because there's not so much chatter in the background that I'm competing against.
Makes sense. Yeah. Makes sense.
So how about for you, Kelz, in terms of mindfulness and finding flow, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I would say in terms of mindfulness and finding flow, what I have noticed in terms of my mindfulness practice, and then starting to get into Recess and I think, we're going to talk about this a bit more, but I think that Recess and just finding flow, it really did help me to sort of, I speak more about dialing in, but it did help me to dial in my attention a bit, even in terms, because sometimes, even though I practice mindfulness since 2014, because of my brain, it still sometimes takes a while to stabilize in my mindfulness practice. And I found that using Recess to get into flow, I was definitely, I noticed some of that it was easier and quicker for me to do my mindfulness practice in the mornings. And
awesome.
Yeah, so it helped me and made it easier.
Awesome. And so I think to kind of round us out, right, we're looking at a tip for a team, right, where recess is working, workflow from recess, working with teams to help enhance their potential. What we might think about if we're a team leader is creating some team mindfulness practices. What does that look like? Well, that can be like 10, 15-minute meditation once a week at its simplest level, right? And it may be helpful to help direct people to an app or have a guided meditation ready, or, rather than, it's probably not helpful to tell people just be still for 10 minutes, right? Like use an expert, bring in an expert, whether it's a real person or a recording or something. And then, encouraging people to set time aside on their calendars and honoring that time as important to functioning and success and performance, to encourage people to set aside mindfulness time in their day, whether they're working from remotely or they're working in person, and when you see that on their calendar, respecting that time, even if it's a 15-minute block, if it's a half an hour block. But the condition there is you're not just sitting there watching Netflix, right? The condition is you're really trying to practice that mindfulness skill, because we recognize it's beneficial to you as an individual, it's beneficial to the team, beneficial to the company. That's what we might recommend for a team leader.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so I think that's a challenge. I think that's a challenge, for persons who are leading a team in HR, business owners. That's a challenge. Like, allow your team to set some mindfulness minutes during the day, give them that time and, make it part of the company culture. I think that's a challenge if you're serious about, doing this stuff for your team. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that about does us. Kelz, any final thoughts on mindfulness before we go?
No. I think we're good. I think, I just would leave with just start to build your mindfulness practice, and it could be your own, just like how with yours, Matt, yours started off as walking through the woods with listening to a podcast. For me, I would just leave with encouraging people for that, like just create and build your own mindfulness practice in a way that makes sense for you and your brain and what you like and the things that you enjoy doing, so start where you are.
The more fun you can have on the journey,
exactly,
the more that practice will stick.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be cold and rigid, and it's supposed to be something that evolves organically for each of us.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for being with us today. Next podcast, we're going to get a little deeper into presence, that aspect of one of our foundations of flow. And we're going to talk about this idea of attention, focus, concentration, right? This is the podcast for somebody of you that may have attention issues or ADHD or want to focus better at work. Are these things the same? No, they're different. And then how do I practice each of these things, and how do I grow skill and attention and focus and concentration, which will grow your mindfulness, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? Each of those components grow your mindfulness. So we'll be looking forward to chatting with you guys next podcast on that. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for finding flow with Recess, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Right. Till next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Flow with Recess. By the way, your flow doesn't have to end here. Our Recess app helps listeners unlock their most productive selves by reducing anxiety and improving their focus. You can find out more about our app as well as more resources to support you on your journey by visiting our website withrecess.com. Links to our bilateral playlist and this week's blog post are also found in our show notes. Until next time, find your flow and get unstuck with Recess.